Friends, an amazing episode the other day was the moment when the European Parliament literally exploded from the heated and uncompromising statements of Viktor Orbán and the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Briefly about the context. The Hungarian Prime Minister presented to Parliament a report on the results of Hungary's presidency of the Council of the European Union. And what started there? To make you understand how Hungarians are loved in the European Union and personally by Viktor Orbán, who is called an agent of the Kremlin and a close friend of Vladimir Putin, just look at the reaction of the left-wing parties. They rejoice that Hungary has completed its presidency, and even sang the song of the Italian guerrilla movement Bella Ciao to Orbán, as if saying to the Hungarian Prime Minister's face, "Get out of here!" But the Hungarians did not let themselves be offended. Later, Orbán took the floor again and simply destroyed the European Commission for its quarrelsome policy towards Russia, saying that Hungary was interested in achieving peace in Eastern Europe and had begun negotiations with Russia. Friends, get ready to hear the amazing speech of the Hungarian Prime Minister. Well, I, in turn, will share my thoughts on what is happening in the European Union now and the prospects for ending the well-known conflict in Eastern Europe. So, before I show you the most striking episodes from Viktor Orbán's scandalous speech, which admittedly put the European Commission in its place very diplomatically, I'll say a few words. The Hungarian Prime Minister is waging a real war against Brussels. This conflict has been going on for years. It all started from the moment when Orbán and his Fidesz party began to build a policy of Hungary's independence from external dictates aimed at protecting national interests. This is why Orbán and his government are under relentless pressure from the European Union, which accuses Hungary of violating so-called European values. The main point of conflict is Orbán's independence. He openly opposes the Brussels bureaucrats who insist on observing common European rules, but Orbán believes that Hungary's national interests should always come first. Brussels uses many levers of pressure on Budapest. One of the toughest is the freezing of EU funds, which are intended for the development of Hungary. The European Commission refers to the alleged violation of the rule of law and the insufficient fight against corruption in the country. However, everyone understands perfectly well that this is not about legal issues, but about Brussels' desire to punish Orbán for his intractability. The European elite is irritated by Orbán's harsh attitude towards foreign non-governmental organizations. He understands perfectly well that through these structures in Hungary they are trying to shake up the internal situation. Foreign NGOs, generously funded from abroad, interfere in Hungary's internal affairs by promoting an agenda alien to Hungarian society. Orbán has repeatedly stressed that he will not tolerate interference in his country's affairs. Under the guise of beautiful words about democracy, in response, Brussels accuses him of suppressing freedom of speech and infringing on civil liberties. However, a real storm of criticism descended on Orbán after his recent trip to Moscow, where he met with Vladimir Putin. All this happened against the background of harsh anti-Russian rhetoric and sanctions imposed by the European Union and NATO against Russia due to the conflict in Eastern Europe. In the context of such tense international relations, Orbán took the initiative to establish a dialogue with Moscow. He did not hesitate to declare that Hungary is interested in cooperation with Russia and is not going to blindly follow the foreign policy instructions of the European Union. His trip caused sharp discontent in Brussels, where they said that such actions undermine the unity of the Union. Brussels is particularly unhappy with Hungary's open support for Russia's position on gas and other economic issues. Despite the criticism, Brussels is acting extremely harshly, threatening Hungary with even greater funding cuts if it does not adhere to a policy that is supported by most EU countries. Orbán, however, does not succumb to these threats and continues to pursue his line, emphasizing that Hungary has the right to make independent decisions in the field of energy. Hungary is perhaps the only country in Europe that has not been affected so much by the energy crisis. This is largely due to the fact that Hungary has maintained relations with Russia, realizing that without Russian energy resources its economy could collapse. Interestingly, Orbán also refused to accept migrants, but actively uses labor from Russia and Belarus, which in turn contributes to the development of the Hungarian economy. And now, friends, as promised, let's listen to this amazing speech by Viktor Orbán, who literally blew the European bureaucrats to smithereens. Quote from Viktor Orbán: "However, I can see that you're not too interested in this, and you want to throw a party here full of leftist liars, as is often the case. However, I believe that this is pure political propaganda. You, members of parliament, can continue to do this if you want, but I am surprised that I have heard from the president of the Commission. This clearly shows that there are disagreements between Hungary and the European Commission. It's obvious. I did not specifically raise these issues, because as chairman I have to work for the benefit of Europe. But it seems to me wrong to discuss these differences within the framework of the Hungarian presidency. Unfortunately, this has never happened before. The previous president of the Commission would never have said anything like that. As stated in the contract, the Commission is the custodian of the contracts. It was a neutral body, and its task was to monitor the implementation of these treaties, putting aside political debates and resolving differences solely through legal means. But now everything has changed. Instead of being the guardian of treaties, the Commission has become a political body, a political weapon that you want to use to attack the patriots of Europe, the people from the Patriot Party. We may face defeat in Eastern Europe, but the reality is that, thanks to the President of the Commission, the European Union is pursuing a flawed policy. If we want to win, we need to get out of this losing position from a poorly planned and poorly executed strategy. If we continue down this path, we will lose. I think we should take into account that diplomatic efforts are necessary in any war. We must have direct and indirect contacts. If we don't do this, we will deepen the crisis. No one is talking. This is an insult to those people who communicated with us when we were preparing for the presidency in Rome. It is a pity that the leader of the European People's Party is not telling the truth. He claims that Hungary's ruling party did not win the European Parliament elections. We got 45% of the votes, and you in Germany got 30%. So which one of us won? And you made personal comments, so I'll say a few words too. Anger is a bad advisor. We have known what the conflict between us is since the 14th year. This is one of the key reasons why you could not become the head of the European Commission. I supported you and promised my support, but then you said that you did not want to become president of the Commission with the votes of Hungarians, and you did not become president. And that's why you're mad at me. I'm sorry that you sided with Hungary's opponents, but there's nothing I can do about it. Please, let's not focus on personal insults, but rather move on to discussing European issues, Ms. Verez. I believe that lack of knowledge is not a good basis for debate. You say that Hungary has high taxes, but we have a flat tax rate of only 15%. Hungary's economic growth is twice the European Union average. And you're talking about Hungary's poor performance? Aren't facts important to you? I see that a member of parliament from France does not like the Hungarian constitutional system. You must understand that we have the right to our own constitution. Our constitution protects families, marriage, and children. Our constitution says that marriage is a union between a man and a woman, and that the father is a man and the mother is a woman. You can't dispute that. Now, regarding the corruption charges, I have to dismiss them. We could exchange personal attacks on this topic because I think that this body, the European Parliament, has a certain expertise in corruption issues. But if we talk about corruption in any state, why doesn't anyone mention, for example, Russia? Last year, only 7,000 Russians worked in Hungary. And how are things in Germany? 300,000 Russians work there, and you're blaming us. 100,000 Russians work in Spain, and you're criticizing Hungary, which employs 7,000 people. Is it fair? Now about economic relations. Hungary conducts trade transparently. And how are things in other countries where you come from? You can see that many countries circumvent sanctions through Asia and continue to trade with Russia. I'll give you the figures. Every month, the European Union exports billions of dollars more to some Central Asian countries than before the conflict between Russia and a well-known country. Why? Because this is how they circumvent the sanctions. German, French, and Spanish companies avoid sanctions by doing so. You also mentioned energy. Western countries initially bought 8 billion euros worth of oil from Turkey and India. This is hypocrisy. In the 23rd year, Western countries bought 44% more oil than before. The tax revenues of these companies were transferred to the Russian treasury. And then you accuse us of being friends with Russia. I agree with you on one thing. I did not come here to read you these facts. I had no such intention. I have come to present the program of the presidency, and I would like to say that there are problems. I would like to inform the faction leaders that there are problems with the competitiveness of the European Union, that the migration issue needs to be addressed, and the Hungarian presidency has an idea, and we would like the parliament to support us in this. That's why I came today, but you decided to turn it all into a political confrontation between the parties. I think it's very unfortunate. If you attack us, I will defend my country. End of quote. Friends, the hypocrisy of the European Union has reached new heights in relation to Viktor Orbán and Hungary. With enviable persistence, Brussels is putting pressure on Budapest for its refusal to break off trade relations with Russia, while it continues to actively purchase oil and gas from Moscow. It's hard not to notice the blatant double standards. All these sanctions are just an illusion, because in reality, energy purchases continue. What, in fact, Viktor Orbán so loudly declared in the walls of the European Parliament. The figures speak for themselves. After the outbreak of the conflict in Eastern Europe, imports of Russian gas and oil to the EU not only did not decrease, but even increased by almost 50%. This is especially noticeable in the example of Germany, which, despite the rhetoric about energy independence, continues to circumvent sanctions and buy Russian energy resources through third countries. It's just pure hypocrisy. The position of Hungary, which had relied on long-term contracts with Gazprom even before the crisis, is particularly contrasting against this background. In the 21st year, when the whole of Brussels demanded the transition to spot contracts with Russia, Orbán chose a different path. He concluded an agreement that ensured Hungary stable gas prices, independent of sharp fluctuations in the market. This step attracted criticism at the time, but as time has shown, it was he who allowed Budapest to avoid the energy crisis that covered the whole of Europe. When the energy crisis hit the continent, energy prices in Hungary remained at an acceptable level, while Western European countries faced unprecedented tariff increases and fuel shortages. Hungary has become the only island of stability amid the general chaos, which has caused envy among many neighbors. But instead of acknowledging the far-sightedness of Hungarian politics, Brussels is branding Orbán a traitor to European solidarity. So solidarity is just going down with the rest of Europe? Europe, meanwhile, is reaching the point of absurdity today, when common sense is considered something vicious, and the protection of national interests is something forbidden. Hungary is being forced to abandon relations with Russia, ostensibly in the interests of collective security. But where was this security when the West itself switched to Russian gas in conditions of speculative market prices? Hungary has chosen its own path, a reasonable, balanced, and thoughtful one. But in today's Europe, such decisions are considered dangerous for the generally accepted line, and they must be suppressed. And now I want to express my opinion, friends. To be honest, Viktor Orbán's speech in the European Parliament is a real breath of fresh air in the sea of Brussels hypocrisy. Yes, he spoke directly, clearly, and sometimes with defiance, which is so lacking for many European leaders who seem to be afraid of their own shadow. I thank Orbán for not being afraid to point a finger at the EU's double standards, reminding me that talking about solidarity is one thing, but acting for the benefit of all the countries of the Union is quite another. He questioned this false rhetoric about unity, where some countries impose their own rules on others, while simultaneously circumventing their own sanctions. It was a moment when the truth came out loud, even if many people didn't like it. And in a world where common sense has become confused with a threat to democracy, his words were like a slap in the face to all this absurdity. But let's look at it soberly. Orbán is certainly a master of political showmanship and knows how to play on contradictions. Although he defends Hungary with enviable fortitude, we must not forget that this is primarily his own interests. The confrontation with Brussels strengthens him inside the country, making him a hero for those who are tired of the Brussels bureaucracy. However, it is important to remember that even the loudest statements sometimes serve as a smokescreen for those decisions that benefit him and his elite specifically. Therefore, while we applaud his audacity, it is worth keeping our eyes open. Politics, as always, remains an art of manipulation, even if it is presented in a beautiful truth wrapper. No matter how they try to stigmatize Viktor Orbán and cast him in a bad light, he invariably puts the interests of his country first, even if this irritates the European elites. Orbán went through years of pressure from the European Union, face threats of freezing funds, accusations of violating democratic norms and the rule of law, as well as harsh criticism for his independent policy towards Russia. His tenacity and willingness to stand up to the bureaucrats from Brussels demonstrate his true commitment to Hungary's national interests, even when he has to face international condemnation, economic pressure, and political provocations. One thing is clear: Viktor Orbán has become an uncomfortable figure for Brussels. Not because he violates any rules, but because he shows an example of how it is possible and necessary to protect the interests of his people. Please do not forget to write your opinion about the material. It is very important to me. Thank you, friends, for your attention, and I wish you good health. See you.